Imagine, if you will, walking into a bank where the teller never asks for identification, because you are already known. Picture an institution where your credit is unlimited, because it is backed by the infinite resources of the divine. Envision an account that never decreases, no matter how much you withdraw, because it is constantly replenished by the abundance of the universe itself. This is not fantasy, dear friends. This is the spiritual reality that Florence Scovel Shinn taught. And it is available to every single one of us right now. In our earthly experience, we have become accustomed to limitation. We check our bank balances with anxiety. We worry about overdrafts. We fear financial insecurity. But what if I told you that these concerns exist only because we have forgotten our true spiritual heritage? What if the very limitations we accept are nothing more than illusions, created by our disconnection from our divine source? Florence Scovel Shinn taught that your word is your wand. And through this principle, she showed thousands how to access their divine inheritance. She understood that the spoken word, when aligned with faith and divine truth, becomes the key that unlocks the treasure vault of heaven. Every affirmation becomes a withdrawal slip, every prayer a transaction with the divine, every act of faith a deposit that multiplies exponentially. The Bank of God operates on principles that transcend human understanding yet are simple enough for a child to grasp. There are no credit checks because your worthiness was established before you were born. There are no interest rates because divine love gives freely. There are no banking hours because the divine never sleeps. There are no account minimums because even the smallest faith can move mountains. But perhaps most remarkably, there are no withdrawal limits because God's abundance is truly infinite. The same source that created billions of stars, that fills the oceans, that provides air for every living creature, maintains your personal account with unlimited resources. This is not metaphor. This is spiritual law as real and reliable as gravity. Today, we will explore how to access this divine banking system, how to make withdrawals through faith, how to increase our spiritual credit through alignment with divine principles, and how to live from a consciousness of unlimited abundance, rather than earthly lack. We will learn from Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings. Examine real, life testimonies of those who have successfully accessed their divine accounts, and discover practical methods for claiming our inheritance right now. In the beginning, before the first star was formed, before the earth received its first ray of sunlight, your account in the Bank of God was established. This is not a poetic metaphor, but a spiritual reality that Florence Scovel Shinn understood with crystal clarity. She taught that every human being comes into this world with unlimited spiritual credit, backed by the infinite resources of the divine. The establishment of your divine account predates your physical birth. In the realm of spirit, where all possibilities exist simultaneously, your prosperity was secured by divine decree. Florence Scovel Shinn often reminded her students that, before you ask, it is given, meaning that your needs, desires, and dreams for abundance were anticipated and provided for in the spiritual dimension, before you even recognize them yourself. Understanding this divine account requires us to shift our consciousness from earthly banking to spiritual banking. In earthly banks, we deposit money earned through labor, we worry about interest rates, and we fear insufficient funds. But in the Bank of God, our account was funded by divine grace. It earns interest through faith, and insufficient funds is impossible, because the source is infinite. Your divine account number is not written on a plastic card, but inscribed in your soul. It is activated not by a PIN code but by faith. Your balance is not determined by your job or your business success, but by your understanding of your spiritual inheritance. Florence Scovel Shinn discovered that the moment we recognize our true spiritual identity as children of the divine, we automatically gain access to our unlimited account. The currency in the bank of God is not paper money or digital numbers, but spiritual energy aligned with divine will. When we think thoughts of abundance, speak words of prosperity, and act from faith rather than fear, we are conducting transactions with the divine. Every positive affirmation is a deposit. Every act of generosity is an investment, and every expression of gratitude multiplies our balance exponentially. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most people live in spiritual poverty, not because their divine account is empty, but because they have forgotten how to access it. It is as if they have millions in the bank, but have lost their ATM card. The account remains full. The resources remain available, but without the proper access method. Faith combined with right thinking, they cannot withdraw what is rightfully theirs. The beauty of your divine account is that it operates on principles of multiplication, rather than subtraction. In earthly banking, when you withdraw money, your balance decreases. But in the bank of God, when you withdraw abundance through faith and positive action, your account actually increases, because you are demonstrating trust in divine supply, which attracts even more blessings. Your divine account also includes features that no earthly bank can offer. There is automatic deposit of daily blessings, overdraft protection through divine grace, and investment options that guarantee infinite returns. The interest rate is based not on market conditions but on your level of faith and alignment with divine principles. Moreover, your account in the bank of God is connected to every other account in the divine system. This means that as you prosper through accessing your divine inheritance, you automatically contribute to the prosperity of others. Unlike earthly wealth, which can create inequality and competition, divine abundance increases for everyone when anyone accesses it successfully. Florence Scovel Shinn observed that many people attempt to access their divine account using earthly methods. They pray for money while worrying about bills. They affirm abundance while believing in lack. They ask for prosperity while acting from poverty consciousness. This is like trying to withdraw money from an ATM while simultaneously blocking the card slot with your hand. The key to accessing your divine account lies in understanding that it operates in the present moment, not in some future time. Your abundance exists now, in the spiritual realm, waiting to be manifested in the physical world through your faith and aligned action. Every moment of doubt is like pressing the cancel button on a successful transaction, while every moment of faith completes another divine withdrawal. The contrast between divine banking and earthly banking reveals why so many people struggle with money, despite the unlimited abundance available to them. Florence Scovel Shinn spent considerable time helping her students understand these fundamental differences, because recognizing them is essential to successfully accessing divine supply. Earthly banking operates from the consciousness of limitation. Banks must carefully manage their reserves, protect against losses, and charge interest to remain profitable. They evaluate creditworthiness based on past performance, require collateral for loans, and impose strict penalties for overdrafts. The entire system is built on the premise that money is scarce and must be carefully controlled. The Bank of God, however, operates from unlimited abundance. There are no reserves to protect because the source is infinite. There are no losses to fear because divine supply never decreases. There is no need to charge interest because giving freely is the nature of divine love. The system is built on the premise that abundance is the natural state of the universe. In earthly banking, your account balance determines your spending power. If you have $1,000, you can spend $1,000. If you have 10,000, you can spend 10,000. Your external circumstances dictate your financial possibilities. But in divine banking, your consciousness determines your access to infinite supply. A person with strong faith and understanding of spiritual law can access more abundance than someone with millions in the bank, but poverty consciousness. Florence Scovel Shinn illustrated this principle through the story of a woman who came to her completely broke, facing eviction, with no apparent resources. Yet within 30 days, this woman had manifested not only enough money to pay her rent, but also a new job that tripled her previous income. How was this possible? She learned to access her divine account through faith and positive declaration, withdrawing from unlimited supply, rather than being limited by her earthly circumstances. Earthly banks require documentation, proof of income, references, and extensive paperwork before approving loans or opening accounts. The Bank of God requires only faith, alignment with divine principles, and recognition of your spiritual heritage as a child of the divine. Your application was pre-approved before you were born. The interest rates in earthly banking fluctuate with market conditions, sometimes working in your favor, sometimes against you. In divine banking, the interest rate is always infinite, because every act of faith, every positive declaration, and every expression of gratitude multiplies exponentially in the spiritual realm, before manifesting in physical form. Earthly banks have operating hours, holidays, and limitations on when you can access your funds. The Bank of God operates continuously, because divine love never sleeps. You can make withdrawals at 3 a.m. through prayer, at noon through affirmation, or at midnight through acts of faith. The divine ATM never closes. Perhaps most importantly, earthly banks can fail, merge, or collapse, potentially leaving depositors without access to their funds. The Bank of God is eternally stable, because it is backed by the infinite resources of the Creator. No economic recession, market crash, or global crisis can affect your divine account, because it exists in the realm of spirit, which is not subject to earthly fluctuations. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that many people try to use earthly banking principles in their relationship with divine supply, and this creates confusion and limitation. They pray for money while worrying about how God will provide it, effectively trying to micromanage the divine. They ask for abundance while simultaneously calculating exactly how much they think they deserve, putting caps on infinite supply. The divine banking system also operates on principles of circulation rather than hoarding. In earthly banking, we are encouraged to save and accumulate as much as possible. In divine banking, we are encouraged to give freely, trust completely, and allow abundance to flow through us to others. The more we circulate divine supply, the more it increases. Understanding these differences allows us to shift our consciousness from earthly limitation to divine abundance. When we stop trying to apply human logic to divine supply, and instead learn to operate according to spiritual law, we gain access to resources that far exceed anything earthly banking can provide. In the Bank of God, faith serves as the ultimate currency, more valuable than gold, more powerful than any earthly money, and more accessible than any physical resource. Florence Scovel Shinn understood that faith is not merely a religious concept, but a practical spiritual technology that activates divine supply and transforms spiritual abundance into physical manifestation. Faith operates as currency in the divine banking system because it represents perfect trust in the unlimited resources of the divine. When you exercise faith, you are essentially declaring your belief that the Bank of God has sufficient funds to cover any withdrawal you need to make. This declaration activates spiritual law and begins the process of manifestation. But faith as currency must be understood correctly. Many people confuse hope with faith, or wishful thinking with true spiritual confidence. Hope says, maybe this will happen. Wishful thinking says, I wish this would happen. Faith declares with absolute certainty, this is already accomplished in the spiritual realm, and must manifest in physical form according to divine law. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith grows through exercise, just like physical muscle grows through training. Each time you successfully demonstrate faith and witness its results, your spiritual currency becomes stronger and more valuable. Small acts of faith build the foundation for larger demonstrations of divine supply. The beauty of faith as currency is that it never depletes through use. Unlike money, which decreases when spent, faith actually increases when exercised. Every successful demonstration of faith strengthens your ability to exercise even greater faith in the future. This creates an upward spiral of increasing abundance and expanding possibilities. Faith as currency also operates on principles of compound interest. A small amount of faith, consistently applied, generates results that exceed the original investment exponentially. Florence Scovel Shinn shared numerous stories of individuals who began with tiny seeds of faith and eventually manifested abundance beyond their original dreams. Consider the story of a businessman who came to Florence Scovel Shinn facing bankruptcy. His earthly accounts were empty, his credit was exhausted, and his business was failing. But she taught him to invest his faith like currency in the bank of God. He began affirming daily, "Divine supply flows through me abundantly, and my business prospers under divine guidance." Within 6 months, not only had he saved his business, but it had grown to become the most successful in his industry. The exchange rate between faith and manifestation is always favorable to the believer. A small investment of faith can yield tremendous returns in physical demonstration. This is because faith aligns us with the infinite creative power of the universe, allowing us to access resources that far exceed our personal limitations. Faith currency also has unique properties that make it superior to any earthly currency. It cannot be stolen because it exists in your consciousness. It cannot be devalued by external circumstances because its value comes from divine source. It cannot be counterfeited because authentic faith carries a spiritual signature that the universe always recognizes. However, faith currency requires careful management to remain pure and effective. Doubt is like spiritual inflation, reducing the purchasing power of your faith. Fear acts like a hidden fee, decreasing the value of your transactions. Worry functions like a withdrawal hold, preventing your faith from completing its divine transactions. Florence Scovel Shinn emphasized that faith must be backed by corresponding action to function as effective currency. Faith without works is like having money but never spending it. The potential remains unrealized. When you combine faith with inspired action, you create the perfect conditions for divine supply to manifest in your physical experience. The denomination of faith currency varies according to the size of your spiritual understanding. Beginners might exercise faith equivalent to spiritual pennies, expecting small demonstrations of supply. Advanced practitioners can exercise faith equivalent to spiritual millions, expecting and receiving magnificent manifestations of abundance. Your faith account, like your divine supply account, was established before your birth and cannot be closed by external circumstances. Even if you have not exercised faith for years, your account remains active and ready for immediate use. The moment you begin exercising faith again, you reactivate your access to divine supply. The wonderful aspect of faith currency is that it multiplies when shared. When you encourage others in their faith, your own faith increases. When you celebrate another person's demonstration of divine supply, you strengthen your own ability to access abundance. This creates a community of prosperity, where everyone's success contributes to everyone else's wealth. The subconscious mind serves as the operating system for your personal connection to the bank of God. Florence Scovel Shinn understood that while your conscious mind might desire abundance, if your subconscious mind is programmed with beliefs of limitation, lack, and unworthiness, it will block your access to divine supply, no matter how sincerely you pray or affirm. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what Florence Scovel Shinn taught decades ago. The subconscious mind controls approximately 95% of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. This means that for lasting transformation in your relationship with money and abundance, you must reprogram the subconscious patterns that either support or sabotage your access to divine supply. The subconscious mind operates like the security system for your divine account. If it has been programmed to believe you are unworthy of abundance, it will reject every attempt to withdraw from the bank of God, treating your faith-filled affirmations as fraudulent transactions. If it has been programmed to expect lack and struggle, it will create experiences that confirm these beliefs, even when unlimited supply is available. Programming the subconscious mind for abundance requires understanding how it receives and processes information. Unlike the conscious mind, which operates through logic and reasoning, the subconscious mind responds to repetition, emotion, and imagery. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn emphasized the power of repeated affirmations spoken with feeling and accompanied by vivid mental pictures of desired outcomes. The most effective method for reprogramming your subconscious mind begins with identifying the limiting beliefs currently installed in your mental operating system. These might include beliefs like, money is the root of all evil, rich people are greedy, I don't deserve abundance, money is hard to come by, or spiritual people shouldn't focus on material wealth. Each of these beliefs acts like a virus in your mental computer, corrupting your ability to access divine supply. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that these limiting beliefs are usually installed during childhood, through repetitive exposure to poverty consciousness from family, society, and cultural conditioning. A child who repeatedly hears, "We can't afford that," "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "We're not the kind of people who have money," develops subconscious programming that automatically rejects abundance, even when it becomes available later in life. The process of reprogramming begins with conscious identification of these limiting patterns, followed by deliberate installation of new, abundance-supporting beliefs. This requires repetition, emotional engagement, and consistent practice over time. Just as it took years for the limiting beliefs to become embedded, it takes dedicated effort to replace them with empowering programming. One of the most powerful techniques Florence Scovel Shinn used involved what she called divine sentences. Carefully crafted affirmations that bypass the conscious mind's resistance and speak directly to the subconscious in language it understands and accepts. These sentences must be stated in the present tense, with complete conviction, and repeated until they become automatic mental responses. The neuroplasticity of the brain provides scientific support for Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings about mental reprogramming. Research shows that consistent repetition of new thought patterns actually rewires neural pathways, creating new automatic responses that support rather than sabotage our goals. Every time you repeat an abundance affirmation with genuine feeling, you strengthen the neural networks that support prosperity consciousness. Emotional engagement accelerates the reprogramming process because the subconscious mind prioritizes emotionally charged information. When you speak abundance affirmations while feeling genuine gratitude, excitement, and certainty, you create powerful emotional associations that help embed the new programming more quickly and deeply. Visualization amplifies the reprogramming process by providing the subconscious mind with specific images to work toward. When you repeatedly visualize yourself living abundantly, accessing divine supply easily, and enjoying financial freedom, you give your subconscious mind a clear blueprint for creating these experiences in physical reality. The timing of reprogramming efforts affects their effectiveness. The subconscious mind is most receptive to new programming during relaxed, meditative states when the analytical conscious mind is quiet. Florence Scovel Shinn often recommended doing abundance affirmations immediately upon waking and just before sleep when the brain operates in alpha and theta frequencies that facilitate subconscious reprogramming. Consistency proves more important than intensity in subconscious reprogramming. Daily repetition of abundance affirmations for 15 minutes creates more lasting change than sporadic sessions of several hours. The subconscious mind responds to regular, predictable input that demonstrates commitment to new programming. Environmental support enhances the reprogramming process. Surrounding yourself with abundance symbols, prosperity books, and people who support your growth creates external reinforcement for the internal changes you are making. This environmental alignment helps prevent the old programming from reasserting itself during vulnerable moments. Florence Scovel Shinn discovered that certain combinations of words, when spoken with faith and understanding, function like spiritual keys that unlock specific vaults in the bank of God. She called these divine sentences because they carry the vibrational frequency of divine truth and have the power to transform spiritual reality into physical manifestation. The science behind divine sentences involves understanding that words are not merely sounds or symbols, but carriers of creative energy. In the beginning, according to spiritual teaching, the universe itself was created through divine word. Let there be light, and there was light. This same creative principle operates when we speak words aligned with divine truth and backed by genuine faith. Divine sentences work because they bypass the logical mind's resistance and speak directly to the universal intelligence that governs all manifestation. When you speak a divine sentence like, "Divine supply flows through me abundantly and continuously," you are not trying to convince the universe to give you money. You are declaring a spiritual truth that must manifest according to universal law. The effectiveness of divine sentences depends on several key factors that Florence Scovel Shinn taught her students to master. First, the words must be aligned with divine truth rather than human logic. Saying, "I hope money will come to me," expresses doubt and limitation. Saying, "I am a magnet for divine abundance," declares spiritual truth and activates universal law. The emotional state while speaking divine sentences dramatically affects their power. Words spoken from desperation, fear, or doubt carry those vibrations and tend to create more of those experiences. Words spoken from faith, gratitude, and expectancy carry higher vibrations that align with divine abundance and attract prosperity experiences. Repetition amplifies the power of divine sentences by embedding them in both conscious and subconscious awareness. Florence Scovel Shinn often recommended repeating key abundance sentences 100 times daily, explaining that this repetition creates a vibrational resonance that attracts corresponding experiences from the universe. The timing of divine sentences affects their manifestation speed. Speaking abundance affirmations while experiencing gratitude for current blessings creates an energetic state that accelerates manifestation. Speaking them while worrying about bills or focusing on lack creates conflicting vibrations that slow or block results. One of the most powerful divine sentences Florence Scovel Shinn taught was, "My supply comes from God, and God is my unfailing, unlimited supply." This sentence addresses multiple limiting beliefs simultaneously, while establishing direct connection to divine source. It removes dependence on external circumstances, while affirming unlimited availability of resources. Another transformative divine sentence is, "I am grateful for my immediate, abundant supply which now manifests perfectly." This combines gratitude with present tense declaration and includes divine timing, creating ideal conditions for manifestation, while surrendering control over how abundance appears. The personalization of divine sentences increases their effectiveness for individual circumstances, while universal truth principles remain constant. Adapting the specific wording to address your particular situation and speak to your subconscious mind in familiar language enhances the connection between affirmation and manifestation. Divine sentences must be distinguished from mere positive thinking or wishful affirmations. Positive thinking attempts to convince yourself that something good might happen. Divine sentences declare spiritual truths that are already established in the realm of infinite possibility and must manifest according to spiritual law when properly activated through faith. The consistency of practice with divine sentences proves more important than the length of individual sessions. Speaking your key abundance affirmations for 10 minutes every morning and evening creates more transformation than occasional longer sessions. The subconscious mind responds to regular, predictable input that demonstrates commitment to change. Environmental factors can enhance or diminish the power of divine sentences. Speaking affirmations in a space dedicated to spiritual practice, surrounded by symbols of abundance and beauty, creates supportive energy that amplifies their effectiveness. Attempting to affirm abundance while surrounded by clutter, bills, and reminders of lack creates conflicting vibrations that reduce impact. The combination of multiple divine sentences addressing different aspects of abundance creates comprehensive programming for prosperity consciousness. For example, using sentences that address worthiness, I deserve unlimited abundance, availability, divine supply is unlimited and always accessible, timing, my good comes to me at the perfect moment, and gratitude, I am grateful for my continuous, abundant supply, covers all bases for complete transformation. Florence Scovel Shinn emphasized that divine sentences are not magic formulas that work automatically regardless of the speaker's consciousness. They are spiritual tools that become effective when used by someone who understands their connection to divine source and speaks them with genuine faith, rather than desperate hope. The most compelling evidence for the reality of divine banking comes from the documented experiences of individuals who have successfully accessed their unlimited accounts. Florence Scovel Shinn collected hundreds of these testimonies throughout her teaching career, and they demonstrate consistent patterns that reveal the spiritual laws governing divine supply. One of the most remarkable cases involved a widow facing foreclosure on her family home. With no income, no savings, and no family support, she seemed to have exhausted all earthly resources. Yet through daily practice of abundance affirmations and unwavering faith in divine supply, she not only saved her home, but discovered an inheritance from a distant relative that provided financial security for the rest of her life. The inheritance had been waiting in probate court for over 2 years, but it manifested at the exact moment her faith reached complete certainty about divine provision. Another powerful testimony came from a businessman whose company was failing during an economic recession. Every rational analysis suggested bankruptcy was inevitable, but he chose to apply Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings instead of accepting defeat. He began each day affirming, "Divine intelligence guides my business decisions, and abundant success flows through all my endeavors." Within 3 months, an unexpected partnership opportunity arose that not only saved his company, but transformed it into the industry leader. The partner had been seeking exactly his expertise for over a year, but found him only after he began radiating confidence in divine guidance. A particularly inspiring case involved a single mother struggling to support 3 children on minimum wage. Despite working multiple jobs, she could barely cover basic expenses and saw no hope for improvement. After learning about the Bank of God, she began affirming daily, "I am a channel for divine abundance. An unlimited supply flows through me to my children." She also visualized herself providing abundantly for her family and living in financial freedom. Within 6 months, she had received a job offer that tripled her income, and a scholarship opportunity emerged that would allow her to complete her education, while her children attended the same private school free of charge. The story of an artist who had struggled for years to sell his work demonstrates how divine supply often manifests through unexpected channels. After applying Florence Scovel Shinn's principles affirming, "My creativity is a gift from God, and the world eagerly receives my artistic expression," he suddenly began receiving commissions from collectors he had never met. It was later revealed that one of his paintings, given as a gift years earlier, had been seen by an influential gallery owner who spent months tracking down the artist. The financial breakthrough that seemed sudden was actually the result of seeds planted through faith and positive declaration years before. A retired couple facing financial hardship due to medical expenses experienced a dramatic demonstration of divine banking principles. Despite their advanced age and limited options, they chose to trust in divine supply rather than despair. They began affirming together, "God's abundant provision covers all our needs, and we live in complete financial security." Not only did they receive an unexpected insurance settlement that covered all medical costs, but a real estate investment made decades earlier, which they had forgotten about, suddenly appreciated in value enough to provide comfortable retirement income. These success stories reveal common patterns that validate Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings about divine supply. First, each person reached a point of complete dependence on divine source rather than earthly resources. Second, they maintained unwavering faith despite external appearances of lack or limitation. Third, they consistently used positive affirmations and visualizations to align their consciousness with abundance. Fourth, they remained open to receiving supply through unexpected channels, rather than limiting God to their personal expectations. The timing of these manifestations also follows spiritual law, rather than human scheduling. In each case, the supply appeared at the moment when faith was complete and doubt was absent, rather than when the need was most desperate. This demonstrates that divine banking operates according to consciousness level, rather than external circumstances. Another significant pattern involves the multiplication principle. In most cases, the divine supply that manifested exceeded the original need by substantial margins. The widow received enough to save her home plus long-term security. The businessman's company became more successful than ever before. The single mother's income tripled, rather than simply increased. This reflects the abundant nature of divine source, which gives pressed down, shaken together, and running over. The permanence of results achieved through divine banking also distinguishes these stories from temporary windfalls or lucky breaks. Because the transformations occurred at the consciousness level, rather than merely the circumstantial level, they created lasting change in each person's relationship with money and abundance. Years later, these individuals continued to prosper because they had learned to maintain their connection to divine source. Perhaps most significantly, each person reported that their success came with unexpected peace, joy, and spiritual growth that proved more valuable than the financial benefits. This demonstrates that accessing the bank of God provides not only material abundance, but also the spiritual fulfillment that money alone cannot supply. Even with understanding of divine banking principles and faith in unlimited supply, many people encounter internal blocks that prevent them from accessing their divine inheritance. Florence Scovel Shinn identified these obstacles as the primary reason why sincere seekers sometimes fail to demonstrate abundance despite earnest spiritual practice. The most common block to divine abundance is unworthiness programming, installed during childhood and reinforced by cultural conditioning. Deep in the subconscious mind, many people carry beliefs that they don't deserve prosperity, that suffering is noble, or that spiritual people should remain poor. These beliefs act like security systems that reject all attempts to access divine supply, treating abundance as an unauthorized transaction. Unworthiness programming often disguises itself as humility or spiritual virtue, making it difficult to identify and remove. Someone might consciously desire financial freedom while unconsciously believing that wanting money is selfish or materialistic. This internal conflict creates a spiritual short circuit that prevents divine energy from flowing into manifestation. Fear represents another major block to accessing the bank of God. Fear of success can be as limiting as fear of failure, because both create resistance to change. Some people unconsciously fear that financial abundance will corrupt them, alienate their friends, or burden them with unwanted responsibilities. These fears, even when unexpressed, create vibrational barriers that repel the very prosperity they consciously desire. The need to control how divine supply manifests creates another significant block. Many people pray for abundance, while simultaneously trying to dictate exactly how, when, and through what channels their supply should appear. This is like trying to make a withdrawal from the bank of God, while insisting the divine teller use only specific denominations and particular procedures. Such attempts to micromanage the divine limit the channels through which abundance can flow. Past disappointments and failed attempts at manifestation can create blocks through accumulated doubt and skepticism. Someone who has tried positive thinking or affirmations without success may develop resistance to spiritual approaches, even when their previous methods were incorrectly applied. This accumulated doubt acts like scar tissue that must be healed before divine energy can flow freely again. Religious conditioning often creates blocks through misunderstood teachings about money and spirituality. Many people have been taught that poverty is virtuous, that rich people are evil, or that focusing on material needs demonstrates lack of faith in God. These distorted interpretations of spiritual truth create internal conflicts that block access to divine abundance. Family loyalty can also block divine supply. When someone unconsciously believes that prospering beyond their family's financial level represents betrayal or abandonment. This is particularly common among people from poor backgrounds, who fear that achieving abundance will separate them from loved ones or violate family values. Perfectionism creates blocks by establishing impossible standards that must be met before abundance is deserved. Someone might believe they must be completely pure, never make mistakes, or achieve spiritual perfection before they can access divine supply. This perfectionist programming ignores the truth that divine love is unconditional and divine supply is available regardless of human imperfection. The attachment to struggle as identity can block abundance when someone has built their self-concept around being a victim of circumstances, a struggling artist, or a noble sufferer. Releasing these identities to embrace prosperity requires fundamental shifts in self-perception that can feel threatening to the ego. Overcoming these blocks requires patient, systematic work to identify and dissolve limiting patterns, while installing empowering beliefs that support divine abundance. Florence Scovel Shinn developed specific techniques for addressing each type of block, always emphasizing that healing these limitations benefits not only the individual, but also everyone in their sphere of influence. The first step in removing abundance blocks involves honest self-examination to identify which limiting beliefs are operating beneath conscious awareness. This might require meditation, journaling, or working with a spiritual counselor to bring hidden patterns into the light of conscious awareness. Accessing your unlimited account in the bank of God requires more than understanding principles. It demands practical application of spiritual laws through specific, repeatable actions. Florence Scovel Shinn developed a comprehensive system of practices that anyone can implement to begin withdrawing from divine supply immediately, regardless of current circumstances. The foundation practice involves establishing daily connection with divine source through what Florence Scovel Shinn called divine appointment time. This means setting aside specific periods, each day dedicated exclusively to spiritual communion. Abundance affirmations and gratitude practice. Just as you might check your earthly bank balance regularly, checking in with your divine account daily maintains active connection and awareness of unlimited supply. Begin each morning with deliberate acknowledgement of your divine inheritance. Before engaging with external circumstances or checking earthly accounts, spend at least 15 minutes affirming your connection to unlimited supply. Use statements like, "I am a beloved child of the divine, and unlimited abundance is my birthright," or, "The bank of God is open to me now, and I withdraw everything I need for this day and more." The practice of gratitude serves as a spiritual debit card that activates your divine account. Spend time each morning listing specific things you are grateful for, including both manifested blessings and spiritual promises, yet to be fulfilled in physical form. Gratitude for what you have attracts more to be grateful for, while gratitude for what is coming activates its manifestation. Visualization amplifies your access to divine supply by providing specific images for universal intelligence to work with. Spend time daily visualizing yourself living abundantly, making purchases without financial stress, giving generously to others, and enjoying complete financial freedom. Make these mental images as detailed and emotionally engaging as possible. The practice of acting as if begins to align your behavior with your desired financial reality. This doesn't mean spending money you don't have or making impractical decisions, but rather adopting the mindset, confidence, and generosity of someone who knows they have unlimited access to divine supply. Walk, talk, and think like the prosperous person you are becoming. Evening practice should include review and reinforcement of abundance consciousness developed during the day. Before sleep, affirm gratitude for the day's supply. Declare expectations for tomorrow's blessings, and forgive any moments when you slipped into lack consciousness. This evening practice helps program your subconscious mind with prosperity patterns that work while you sleep. The practice of tithing or systematic giving demonstrates faith in divine supply, while creating circulation that increases your own abundance. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that giving activates the law of circulation, ensuring that what flows out in faith returns multiplied. Even small amounts given consistently with love create powerful momentum toward greater prosperity. Surrounding yourself with abundance symbols reinforces your connection to divine supply throughout the day. This might include carrying a small token that represents prosperity to you, wearing colors that make you feel abundant, or placing symbols of success where you will see them regularly. These environmental cues help maintain prosperity consciousness even during challenging moments. The practice of blessing others' abundance strengthens your own connection to divine supply. When you see someone enjoying prosperity, instead of feeling envious or resentful, consciously bless their good fortune and affirm that their success demonstrates the unlimited nature of divine supply available to everyone. Maintaining an abundance journal provides concrete evidence of divine supply working in your life. Record every instance of unexpected money, surprising opportunities, helpful connections, or other forms of supply that appear. This written record builds faith by documenting patterns of divine provision that might otherwise be forgotten or dismissed. Among all the techniques Florence Scovel Shinn taught for accessing divine abundance, none proved more immediately powerful than what she called the 3-word formula. This simple yet profound method can instantly shift consciousness from limitation to abundance, opening immediate access to the bank of God regardless of external circumstances. The 3 words that constitute this formula are "I win now." These words, when understood and applied correctly, carry the vibrational frequency of victory, the consciousness of divine favor, and the expectation of immediate success. They bypass the logical mind's objections and speak directly to universal intelligence in language it cannot refuse. I establishes your divine identity as a beloved child of the Creator, worthy of unlimited abundance, and equipped with inherent power to access divine supply. This first word claims your spiritual inheritance and asserts your rightful place in the divine order of prosperity. Win declares absolute victory over lack, limitation, and financial struggle, It announces that you are not hoping for success, working toward abundance, or trying to overcome poverty. You are already victorious in the spiritual realm, and that victory must manifest in physical experience according to spiritual law. Now, demands immediate manifestation and rejects delay, doubt, or gradual improvement. It insists that your good exists in this present moment and can be accessed instantly through faith and spiritual understanding. This word eliminates the gap between spiritual truth and physical demonstration. When these three words are combined and spoken with complete conviction, they create what Florence Scovel Shinn called an irresistible spiritual demand that the universe cannot ignore. They activate dormant spiritual faculties, align consciousness with divine will, and accelerate the manifestation process exponentially. The power of this formula lies not in the words themselves, but in the consciousness they represent. When spoken with genuine faith, "I win now" must be declared with the same certainty you would use to state your own name or confirm a mathematical fact. Any doubt, hope, or wishful thinking dilutes the formula's effectiveness. The repetition of this formula throughout the day maintains constant connection to victory consciousness. Florence Scovel Shinn recommended repeating "I win" now 100 times each morning and evening, plus additional repetitions whenever facing challenging circumstances or moments of doubt about divine supply. The emotional state, while speaking this formula, dramatically affects its power. The words must be spoken with feelings of triumph, gratitude, and absolute certainty rather than desperation, fear, or pleading. You are not begging the universe for victory. You are declaring victory that already exists in spiritual reality. The application of this formula to specific situations increases its effectiveness for particular needs. For financial challenges, declare "I win" now while visualizing abundant supply flowing to you. For business difficulties, speak these words while seeing your enterprise prospering beyond expectation. For any form of lack or limitation, use this formula while focusing on the corresponding abundance you desire. The timing of this formula's use can accelerate manifestation when aligned with natural rhythms. Speaking "I win" now immediately upon waking, when the subconscious mind is most receptive, programs the entire day for victory. Declaring it just before sleep allows the formula to work through subconscious processing overnight. Environmental factors can amplify the formula's power when consciously arranged. Speaking "I win" now, while looking in a mirror, increases personal identification with victory. Declaring it while standing in natural sunlight adds solar energy to the spiritual declaration. Repeating it while walking activates both mental and physical momentum towards success. The combination of this formula with visualization creates maximum manifestation power. While repeating "I win" now, simultaneously visualize yourself experiencing the specific victory you desire. See yourself receiving abundant supply, celebrating financial freedom, or enjoying whatever form of success you need. The faith level while using this formula determines its manifestation speed. Spoken with complete conviction, "I win" now can produce immediate results. Spoken with partial belief, it builds gradually toward full manifestation. Spoken with doubt or desperation, it remains ineffective until faith is strengthened. After mastering basic connection to the bank of God, advanced practitioners can employ sophisticated spiritual techniques that dramatically accelerate abundance manifestation and expand access to unlimited divine resources. Florence Scovel Shinn developed these methods for students ready to move beyond elementary spiritual banking into mastery of divine supply principles. The technique of spiritual banking by proxy allows you to access divine abundance on behalf of others, while simultaneously multiplying your own supply. This advanced method recognizes that the Bank of God operates on principles of interconnected abundance, where blessing others increases your own blessings exponentially. By affirming abundance for family members, friends, or even strangers, you create multiple channels through which divine supply can flow back to you. Teething consciousness represents another advanced technique that transforms the traditional practice of giving into a sophisticated spiritual technology. Rather than simply donating money from earthly resources, tithing consciousness involves giving from the awareness of unlimited divine supply. When you give knowing that your gift comes from infinite source, and that infinite source immediately replenishes whatever flows through you, you create a perpetual circulation system that attracts abundance like a spiritual magnet. The practice of abundance meditation allows direct communion with divine intelligence regarding financial matters. During deep meditative states, advanced practitioners can receive specific guidance about investments, business decisions, and opportunities that align with divine will. This technique requires training in distinguishing authentic spiritual guidance from mental projection or wishful thinking. Prophetic declaration involves speaking future abundance into existence through alignment with divine timing and purpose. Advanced students learn to discern not only what abundance is available, but when it will manifest and how it serves the larger divine plan. These declarations carry additional power because they align personal prosperity with cosmic purpose. The technique of vibrational matching requires sophisticated understanding of how thoughts, emotions, and actions create energy signatures that attract corresponding experiences. Advanced practitioners learn to consciously raise their vibration to match the frequency of unlimited abundance, maintaining this elevated state consistently rather than fluctuating between abundance and lack consciousness. Spiritual investment represents an advanced form of giving where resources are directed not just to charitable causes, but specifically to spiritual purposes that multiply divine energy in the world. This might include supporting spiritual teachers, funding consciousness, raising projects, or investing in enterprises that serve humanity's spiritual evolution. Such investments generate returns that transcend financial calculation. The practice of divine timing alignment teaches advanced students to work with, rather than against, the natural rhythms of manifestation. By learning to recognize when spiritual conditions are optimal for particular demonstrations, and when patience serves better than action, practitioners can dramatically increase their success rate while reducing effort and stress. Quantum abundance technique applies cutting-edge spiritual understanding to manifestation practice. This method recognizes that all possible abundances exist simultaneously in quantum reality, and that consciousness serves as the selection mechanism that determines which possibility becomes physical experience. Advanced practitioners learn to consciously choose abundant realities from infinite possibility, while releasing attachment to current circumstances. The technique of spiritual authority involves claiming and exercising your divine right to command abundance, rather than merely requesting it. This advanced approach recognizes that as children of the divine, we inherit not only access to unlimited resources, but also authority to direct divine energy for constructive purposes. This technique requires great spiritual maturity to avoid ego inflation, while maintaining humble recognition of divine source. Abundance anchoring allows practitioners to establish permanent energetic connections to specific forms of divine supply. By creating spiritual anchors through repeated successful demonstrations, advanced students can eventually access certain types of abundance almost automatically without conscious effort. This technique is particularly valuable for ensuring consistent supply of necessities while freeing attention for higher spiritual pursuits. Once you have successfully accessed the bank of God and begun experiencing regular demonstrations of divine abundance, maintaining consistent connection becomes crucial for continued prosperity. Florence Scovel Shinn observed that many students experienced initial success, followed by gradual decline, when they failed to maintain the spiritual practices that created their breakthrough. The most important factor in maintaining divine supply connection involves consistent daily practice, regardless of external circumstances. When abundance is flowing freely, there is natural tendency to reduce spiritual practice, assuming the connection is permanently established. However, divine supply flows through consciousness, and consciousness requires regular maintenance, just as physical health requires ongoing care. Establishing non-negotiable daily minimums prevents gradual disconnection from divine source. Even during busy periods or when feeling abundant, spend at least 15 minutes each morning in gratitude, affirmation, and communion with divine intelligence. This minimum daily practice maintains your spiritual account in active status and prevents unconscious slippage back into lack consciousness. The practice of abundance vigilance involves monitoring your thoughts, words, and emotions for any return of limitation thinking. Old patterns of worry, doubt, and fear can reassert themselves gradually, especially during challenging times. By maintaining conscious awareness of your mental and emotional states, you can immediately correct any drift toward poverty consciousness before it affects your demonstrations. Regular spiritual account reviews help maintain clear connection to divine supply by examining recent manifestations and identifying patterns of flow or restriction. Just as you might review earthly bank statements to understand your financial patterns, reviewing your spiritual demonstrations reveals valuable information about your consciousness trends and areas needing attention. The principle of continuous circulation maintains divine supply by ensuring that abundance flows through you to others rather than stagnating in accumulation. While building financial security is practical and wise, hoarding abundance from fear or greed creates energetic blockages that eventually reduce supply. Regular giving, sharing, and circulation keeps the abundance flowing and attracting more. Surrounding yourself with abundance, conscious community provides ongoing support for maintaining prosperity consciousness. When everyone around you operates from lack mentality, their energy can gradually influence your thinking, unless you actively maintain higher awareness. Seeking fellowship with others who understand and practice divine supply principles creates mutual reinforcement that benefits everyone involved. The practice of preemptive gratitude maintains connection by giving thanks for divine supply before specific demonstrations appear. This advanced technique demonstrates such complete trust in divine banking that you can celebrate your abundance, even while awaiting its physical manifestation. Such faith creates powerful attractive force that accelerates manifestation while maintaining joyful expectancy. Regular study and review of spiritual prosperity principles prevents gradual forgetting of truths that created your success. The logical mind tends to explain away spiritual demonstrations through rationalization and coincidence thinking. Consistent study of Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings and other spiritual prosperity materials reinforces understanding and prevents backsliding into limited thinking. The technique of upgrading expectations maintains momentum by continuously expanding your capacity to receive divine supply. As you successfully demonstrate smaller amounts or basic needs, progressively increase your faith level to expect and receive greater abundance. This prevents plateau effects and allows unlimited expansion of your divine supply demonstrations. Environmental maintenance includes keeping your living and working spaces aligned with abundance consciousness through beauty, order, and symbols of prosperity. Clutter, chaos, and poverty symbols gradually influence subconscious programming and can reduce your connection to divine supply. Regular attention to your physical environment supports and reinforces your prosperity consciousness. The ultimate purpose of accessing the bank of God extends far beyond personal financial security to include blessing others and serving the greater good through conscious circulation of divine abundance. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that individual prosperity reaches its highest expression when it becomes a channel for lifting others into their own abundance awareness. The spiritual law of circulation operates on the principle that whatever you give in love and faith returns to you multiplied. However, this law must be understood correctly to avoid mechanical application that defeats its spiritual purpose. Giving solely to receive more for yourself creates energy of manipulation rather than love, which actually reduces rather than increases your abundance flow. Authentic spiritual giving flows from gratitude and recognition that all abundance comes from divine source and belongs ultimately to the divine. When you share your resources, knowing they come from unlimited supply and will be immediately replenished, your giving carries the vibration of abundance rather than sacrifice. This abundance vibration attracts more abundance while blessing recipients with energy that helps them access their own divine supply. The practice of inspired giving involves learning to recognize divine guidance about when, how much, and to whom to give, rather than giving from obligation, tradition, or manipulation. Inspired giving flows from spiritual intuition that knows exactly what form of sharing serves the highest good for all involved. This type of giving never depletes the giver, because it aligns with divine will and multiplies blessing for everyone. Sharing abundance consciousness proves as important as sharing material resources. When you teach others about their connection to divine supply, demonstrate faith in unlimited resources, or simply radiate confidence in divine provision, you help others access their own abundant inheritance. This consciousness sharing often produces more lasting benefit than material gifts, because it empowers others to create ongoing abundance rather than temporary relief. The technique of blessing and releasing allows maximum multiplication of shared abundance by combining material giving with spiritual blessing while releasing attachment to results. When you give money, resources, or assistance while simultaneously blessing the recipient and releasing any expectation or control over how your gift is used, you create pure abundance energy that multiplies exponentially in both your life and theirs. Creating abundance circles involves consciously gathering with others who share commitment to divine supply principles and mutual support in prosperity consciousness. These circles might include prayer groups, study groups, mastermind groups, or simply friendships centered around spiritual abundance practices. The synergy created when abundance conscious people unite multiplies everyone's individual capacity to demonstrate divine supply. The practice of anonymous abundance involves sharing resources without recipients knowing the source, eliminating ego satisfaction while maximizing spiritual benefit. This advanced form of giving removes all possibility of personal credit or recognition, ensuring that your motivation remains pure spiritual service. Anonymous giving often produces the most powerful multiplication effects because it carries the highest vibration of selfless love. Professional abundance sharing involves consciously using your career, business, or talents as channels for divine blessing in the world. This might mean choosing work that serves humanity's highest good, conducting business with integrity and generosity, or simply radiating abundance consciousness through whatever professional activities you perform. When your work becomes a form of spiritual service, it attracts unlimited divine support and resources. The principle of cheerful giving requires maintaining joy and enthusiasm while sharing abundance rather than giving from duty, guilt, or pressure. The Bible teaches that God loves a cheerful giver, and Florence Scovel Shinn understood this means that joyful giving carries the vibration that attracts divine multiplication. Reluctant or resentful giving, even of large amounts, produces minimal spiritual return because it lacks the love energy that activates multiplication. Teaching abundance principles represents one of the highest forms of sharing because it empowers others to access their own unlimited divine inheritance. When you help someone understand their connection to the bank of God, learn to exercise faith in divine supply, or overcome blocks to spiritual prosperity. You provide them with tools for lifelong abundance, rather than temporary assistance. Such teaching multiplies your own understanding, while blessing others with permanent solutions. The highest level of spiritual prosperity, consciousness, involves shifting from seeking abundance to living from abundance. Recognizing that your unlimited divine inheritance is not something to acquire, but something to express from your true spiritual nature. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this fundamental shift in perspective transforms not only your financial experience, but your entire relationship with life itself. Living from abundance means recognizing that you are not a limited human being trying to access divine supply, but rather a divine being temporarily expressing through human form, with unlimited creative power at your disposal. This identity shift changes everything about how you approach money, work, relationships, and daily life, because you operate from inherent wealth rather than perceived lack. The consciousness of already having creates entirely different energy than the consciousness of trying to get. When you truly know that unlimited abundance is your natural state and current reality in spiritual dimension, you stop desperately seeking and start confidently claiming what is already yours. This relaxed confidence attracts resources much more effectively than desperate striving. Daily life from abundance consciousness involves making decisions based on unlimited possibility rather than apparent limitations. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" you ask, "Does this serve my highest good and align with divine will?" This shift opens up possibilities that limitation thinking automatically excludes, while ensuring your choices support, rather than compromise your spiritual development. The practice of abundance breathing helps maintain continuous awareness of unlimited supply throughout ordinary activities. With each inhale, consciously breathe in divine abundance, love, and creative power. With each exhale, release limitation, fear, and doubt. This simple technique maintains elevated consciousness, even during routine tasks or challenging situations. Speaking from abundance consciousness involves choosing words that reflect unlimited supply rather than limitation. Instead of saying, "I can't afford that," say, "I'm choosing to invest my resources differently." Instead of "money is tight," say, "I'm focusing my abundance in specific areas." This language shift gradually reprograms subconscious beliefs while presenting abundance identity to others. The attitude of divine entitlement recognizes your legitimate spiritual right to unlimited prosperity without arrogance or selfishness. You are entitled to divine abundance, not because you have earned it through personal effort, but because you are a beloved child of infinite Creator who desires your prosperity. This healthy entitlement eliminates false humility that blocks abundance while maintaining gratitude and recognition of divine source. Generous living flows naturally from abundance consciousness, because you know that sharing from unlimited supply increases, rather than decreases your resources. When you truly understand that divine bank account never depletes, you can give freely, tip generously, and support others lavishly without fear of personal lack. This generosity creates circulation that attracts even more abundance. The principle of effortless manifestation emerges when you stop trying to force abundance and instead allow it to flow naturally from your consciousness of unlimited supply. Effort implies resistance and struggle, while allowance creates space for divine intelligence to provide resources through the most efficient and harmonious channels available. Quality consciousness replaces quantity seeking when you live from abundance awareness. Instead of desperately trying to accumulate as much money as possible, you focus on experiencing the highest quality of life, relationships, and service. This quality focus often produces greater financial results than quantity seeking, while ensuring your prosperity enhances, rather than complicates, your life experience. The practice of instant abundance involves recognizing that every moment offers unlimited creative potential, and that you can access divine supply instantaneously through consciousness alignment. This doesn't mean expecting money to materialize from thin air, but rather knowing that the intelligence and resources needed for any situation are always immediately available when approached with proper spiritual understanding. One of Florence Scovel Shinn's most profound teachings involved recognizing that apparent financial challenges, setbacks, and crises often serve as disguised opportunities to access greater levels of divine abundance than previously experienced. This perspective transforms problems from obstacles into doorways, revealing the spiritual alchemy that converts every difficulty into increased prosperity. The principle of divine opposition suggests that when you begin seriously accessing the bank of God, old patterns of limitation may intensify temporarily before dissolving completely. This intensification occurs because moving into greater abundance requires releasing outdated beliefs and behaviors that no longer serve your expanded prosperity consciousness. What appears as increased financial pressure often signals that breakthrough is imminent. Every financial challenge contains embedded wisdom that, when extracted and applied, leads to greater abundance than existed before the challenge appeared. Job loss might reveal entrepreneurial opportunities previously unnoticed. Business failure might redirect you toward more profitable ventures. Investment losses might teach discernment that prevents future mistakes while attracting better opportunities. The technique of challenge blessing involves immediately blessing every apparent financial problem as a perfect opportunity for divine supply to demonstrate its unlimited nature. Instead of resisting, fearing, or resenting financial difficulties, welcome them as chances to prove the reality of spiritual abundance principles in your experience. This blessing attitude transforms the energy around challenges from resistance to receptivity. Opportunity mining requires examining every financial challenge for hidden possibilities, connections, and resources that may not be immediately obvious. The business contact you meet while seeking financial help might provide a lucrative partnership. The skills you develop while overcoming money problems might become the foundation for future wealth. The people you meet during difficult times might become lifelong abundance partners. The practice of grateful challenge acceptance acknowledges that financial difficulties often serve to strengthen your abundance consciousness and develop spiritual muscles that support greater prosperity. Just as physical exercise creates temporary discomfort that leads to permanent strength, financial challenges can develop spiritual qualities like faith, creativity, and resourcefulness that attract lasting abundance. Converting crisis into opportunity requires maintaining abundance consciousness, especially during apparent lack experiences. When bills exceed income, affirmations become more important, not less. When business slows down, visualization intensifies rather than stops. When investments lose value, faith in divine supply increases rather than decreases. This counterintuitive approach aligns you with spiritual law that transcends material appearances. The technique of problem partnership involves consciously inviting divine intelligence to collaborate in solving financial challenges, rather than struggling alone with human resources. Present every financial difficulty to divine wisdom as an opportunity for creative solution that benefits everyone involved. Often the solutions that emerge exceed anything human logic could have devised. Setback celebration recognizes that apparent backwards movement often creates momentum for forward leaps that surpass previous levels of achievement. The author who experiences rejection might be redirected toward a more profitable publishing opportunity. The salesperson who loses a major client might discover a market segment that generates greater income. Celebrating setbacks as redirections maintains positive energy that attracts better outcomes. Learning to perceive financial challenges as abundance acceleration allows you to extract maximum value from difficult experiences. Each challenge forces development of new skills, deeper faith, creative solutions, and expanded networks that support greater future prosperity. The person who has never faced financial difficulty often lacks the spiritual muscle necessary to handle large-scale abundance when it arrives. The principle of challenge gratitude involves thanking divine intelligence for providing challenges that strengthen your prosperity consciousness and reveal previously hidden resources. This advanced perspective recognizes that loving wisdom sometimes provides difficult experiences, specifically because they serve our highest development and lead to greater abundance than comfort would produce. Developing crisis creativity transforms financial emergencies into innovation opportunities that often produce breakthrough solutions with long-term profit potential. The musician who cannot afford studio time might develop home recording skills that become a profitable service. The entrepreneur facing cash flow problems might discover more efficient business methods that increase profitability permanently. As we conclude this comprehensive exploration of the Bank of God and your unlimited spiritual inheritance, we must recognize that everything we have discussed represents merely the beginning of an infinite journey into divine abundance. Florence Scovel Shinn understood that accessing spiritual prosperity is not a destination to reach, but an eternal expansion into greater expressions of divine creativity and service. Your future in partnership with divine abundance holds unlimited potential for growth, service, and manifestation beyond anything you can currently imagine. The principles you have learned create foundation for demonstrations that will exceed your present comprehension, just as your current understanding surpasses what you knew before beginning this spiritual journey toward prosperity consciousness. The Bank of God operates on expansion principles that ensure your abundance capacity will continue growing throughout your lifetime and beyond. Each successful demonstration of divine supply increases your faith level, which qualifies you for even greater demonstrations. Each act of generous sharing multiplies your access to unlimited resources. Each moment of gratitude for divine provision opens channels for increased blessing. Your partnership with divine abundance serves purposes that extend far beyond personal comfort or security. As you master the principles of spiritual prosperity, you become a demonstration of divine love in action, proof that unlimited supply exists for all humanity, and a catalyst that helps others discover their own abundant inheritance. Your prosperity blesses not only yourself, but everyone whose life you touch. The evolution of your abundance consciousness will naturally progress through predictable stages, each bringing greater capacity for both receiving and giving. Beginning stages focus on meeting personal needs and establishing basic financial security. Intermediate stages expand to include blessing family and friends while building resources for larger service. Advanced stages channel abundance toward humanitarian purposes and consciousness transformation on global scales. Future challenges you encounter will serve as opportunities to develop even greater mastery of spiritual abundance principles, rather than threats to your prosperity. Each new level of abundance manifestation requires corresponding growth in spiritual maturity, wisdom, and service capacity. The challenges that arise will always be perfectly calibrated to develop exactly the qualities needed for your next expansion. Your unique gifts, talents, and passions represent divine assignments that connect your personal abundance to service opportunities that fulfill both your prosperity and your purpose simultaneously. The Bank of God provides unlimited resources, specifically to support the unique contribution only you can make to humanity's spiritual evolution and practical welfare. The ripple effects of your abundance consciousness will influence others in ways you may never fully understand in this lifetime. Your demonstration of spiritual prosperity principles gives others permission to access their own divine inheritance. Your confidence in unlimited supply challenges limitation, thinking in everyone you encounter. Your generous sharing creates models that inspire others to trust divine provision. Technological advancement and global connectivity create unprecedented opportunities for abundance. Conscious individuals to serve humanity, while expressing divine prosperity on scales previously impossible. The internet allows spiritual teachers to reach millions instantly. Global markets provide platforms for abundant service. Communication technologies enable prosperity consciousness to spread rapidly worldwide. Your relationship with the Bank of God will continue deepening throughout your spiritual journey, revealing new dimensions of divine abundance and service opportunity. What seems like unlimited access now represents only elementary understanding of truly infinite supply, available through mature spiritual partnership with divine intelligence. The legacy you create through conscious abundance demonstration extends beyond material inheritance to include spiritual influence that continues blessing humanity long after your physical transition. Every person you help discover their divine inheritance becomes capable of helping others make the same discovery, creating exponential expansion of prosperity consciousness across generations. Environmental and social challenges facing humanity require abundance. Conscious individuals who can channel unlimited divine resources towards solutions that serve the highest good of all. Your mastery of spiritual prosperity principles prepares you to participate in healing and transforming world conditions through conscious application of divine abundance. Future generations will benefit from the foundation of abundance consciousness you establish through your current spiritual practice and demonstration. The prosperity principles you master and share create positive influence that extends through your family line and sphere of influence far into the future. Your ultimate destiny involves complete integration of spiritual awareness with material abundance, creating seamless flow between divine consciousness and practical manifestation. This integration allows you to live simultaneously in spiritual and material realms without conflict, serving as bridge between infinite possibility and earthly expression. The Bank of God awaits your increasingly expanded access and partnership. Your account remains unlimited, your credit is permanently established, and your divine inheritance continues, growing even as you withdraw from it. Step forward with confidence into the abundant future that divine love has prepared for you, knowing that your greatest demonstrations of prosperity and service still lie ahead. Dear spiritual prosperity student, you now possess the keys to the most magnificent banking system ever created. The Bank of God stands open to you 24 hours every day, with unlimited funds bearing your name, waiting for your faithful withdrawal through spiritual understanding and applied faith. Remember that accessing divine abundance is not about learning complex techniques or achieving spiritual perfection. It is about recognizing and claiming what already belongs to you as a beloved child of infinite Creator. Your account was established before time began, funded with unlimited resources, and activated through your spiritual awakening to divine truth. Florence Scovel Shinn's teachings provide practical roadmap for living from abundance consciousness, rather than lack limitation. Every principle we have explored, every technique we have examined, and every story we have shared confirms the same fundamental truth. Unlimited supply exists, right now for everyone who learns to access it through faith and spiritual understanding. Your journey into divine prosperity has only begun. The demonstrations you will experience, the service you will provide, and the blessings you will share will exceed everything discussed here. The Bank of God contains infinite resources for infinite expansion into greater expressions of love, abundance, and service throughout your eternal spiritual journey. Step forward with confidence, knowing that your divine inheritance awaits your claim. Speak your abundance affirmations with authority, Visualize your prosperity with certainty, and give from your unlimited supply with joy. The universe conspires to support your success, and divine intelligence provides everything needed for your abundant future. Welcome to your unlimited life in partnership with divine abundance. Your greatest demonstrations are yet to come.